been doing a bit of work off camera with the EKCO, and a few bits and pieces I've removed and changed. This is the capacitor that sits across the mains. It's a wax capacitor, and as you can see, most of the wax is evacuated from the capacitor. Obviously it's got quite hot, but having to sort of sit across the mains. Looks like a date code on these of about 1956, I think I saw on somewhere. Not particularly on this capacitor, but certainly these capacitors are pretty old. And of course they're all sort of leaky by now anyway. But there's one thing to note about these capacitors. If you're going to do a lot of radio repairs, this wax, you can recycle almost any old junk nowadays, and the wax that leaks out of these capacitors is actually quite useful. And what I've done is, the capacitors that are actually sort of leaked wax all over the chassis, which you can see here, you can see all this wax has leaked all over the chassis. That's where the mains cap was. I've saved that wax. And you're probably thinking, well, why are you saving the wax? What use is that? Well, it's actually very useful for, if you've been adjusting IF transformers, you might find that you come across a transformer that's got a really loose core. I know Hacker Radio used like an elastic band almost that ran the length of the inside of the core where the screw adjustment goes, and that used to bind up on the ferrite core to keep it from rattling around. But a lot of the other companies used to use wax, and that's ideal for that, because certainly with the Mayflower the cores are quite loose, and all you need to do is you just need to sort of run your soldering iron over the wax, melt the wax into the core, let it set, and then the core's fixed in position. And if you need to break the seal again, as long as you're working on a radio that's in sort of room temperature, the wax will allow you to move the core without actually sort of fixing the core solidly. So it's quite useful to keep a little bit of that wax just in a little bag somewhere, just to fix those inductors should you need to. I've changed the capacitor here, and this capacitor here is one of the decoupling capacitors to the amplifier. I'm just going to run it up now, and there seems to have got a slight improvement on the audio, and the FM seems to be working slightly better. So what I need to do next is I need to sort of go through, because it seems to be the FM alignment seems to be either out or the FM is very insensitive. I'm getting much better response on FM now, but it's still relatively weak. And you hear that? If I've got a fairly strong signal and I tune off, I'll do it again. I'm going to do it now. The FM seems to be getting better and better, but if I'm on a strong signal and I tune off signal, there's a big sound, and it's almost like the AGC is not working properly, and that could also be a capacitor, decoupling capacitor that's not working. If you look at the circuit here, and I'm looking around these capacitors here on the you've got the AM and FM selection here, and this looks like to me like the AGC circuit. This is the tuning indicator, which is this little magic eye here, and that's all tied in with the either the FM. It looks like the FM signal strength, and that's the AM. But that all looks to me further back here is the there's the AGC line, or the AVC line if you're in the States. So I'm going to start looking at these points here and check for these capacitors here to make sure that none of these are leaky. Because the radio is actually getting, each time I turn it on, it seems the FM seems to get better and better, which would suggest to me like a capacitor needs reforming. I'm getting reasonable. I mean, last night I was playing it and it was sort of this volume. I know the camera won't pick it up because it's got an automatic level control on it, but it's, well, I'd say twice as loud as it was tonight as it was last night, and the set sensitivity seems to be coming up overall. So what I need to do is go around and check rest of those electrolytics that are possibly leaky or dried up. Certainly most of the wax capacitors I've changed that have got any voltage across them. I did have a quick look at some of the capacitors in the IF stage, and these are these capacitors here. This is like C11, C18. Now, these capacitors are actually mounted externally to the IF transformer. There's another one there, sorry, C41, C40. And because they've got such a tiny voltage across them, they shouldn't cause any problems. They're not short, they're certainly not open, and if they're leaky, well, it doesn't really matter because there's such a tiny voltage across them. It won't affect the performance. But it's the capacitor that I'm looking at that have got the bit of voltage across them that I need to really go through and check, like C51 here. I think there's, sorry, off camera, aren't I? C51 here needs looking at anything with a bit of voltage across it. But most of the mains, the DC decoupling has been replaced. This capacitor here has been changed. These capacitors here, they all seem to be okay. I've checked the voltages, and all the voltages appear to be within spec. So the radio is more or less, I think, as good as it's going to get without changing all the components, all the resistors, all the capacitors. I don't really want to do that because it's, even though it's a nice looking radio, it's still a very basic budget model, and I just want to really get it working well enough that it's going to be reliable. Certainly things like the mains capacitor here, that's absolutely fine, even though it's sort of 50 years old. It runs cool, there's no mains hum on there. Still waiting for the pygmy bulb for the backlight, and also the Magic Eye doesn't seem to work very well, and that's also possibly tied in with the AGC circuit and the biasing to the Magic Eye. You've got this capacitor here. I'm going to check in a minute. That's going to be the next capacitor to test, because the Magic Eye doesn't seem to shift its position, and if that capacitor's leaky, it's going to hold the grid of this Magic Eye at one point, so you're not going to get any deflection on the Magic Eye. Okay, I'm looking at the EKCO this evening and trying to work out why the FM's so weak, and I think I've ascertained that it's probably a problem with the AGC circuit. I'm feeding this bit of audio into the radio, and I don't want to use a tone because it's driving me around the bend, so I'm using this is an old Amiga piece of games music written by someone called Jason Page. I actually quite like this piece of music, so I'm using this because I'm not going to get copyrighted on it. I'm feeding a very low RF signal into the radio at the moment, and the aerial's connected straight from the Marconi signal generator straight into the radio. And the audio's reasonably okay. The level's still very low, but the problem is if I increase the level to let's increase it to 10 millivolts. Here the distortion's come in there. Now it's also shifted the tune off. It's quite distorted. The Magic Eye hasn't shifted its position at all. If I increase the level significantly, I'm going to put 1 volt in. This is an overload situation. Okay, that's what you'd expect. The Magic Eye still hasn't shifted, and I'm going to turn the RF power off now. And back on. And the AGC seems to be very sluggish on it now. I'm not sure if that is actually the problem. But there's also another problem. If I detune off the station, we won't do it now. It was a big, when I was detuning earlier on, there was a sort of large mains hum, and then it sort of settled down and it faded away. Almost like the automatic gain control just taking its time to sort itself out. But there's no shift at all in the Magic Eye. So I'm wondering if the AGC circuit's actually working at all. So I think the next thing to do is to try and work out if the AGC does actually do anything with the increase of signal. And I'm trying to work out how it works here, but it looks like the AGC signal's taken from, let's see here. This looks like the AGC line for the AM section, and that also feeds the Magic Eye. So the FM section's taken from the discriminator's output here and is fed back into this valve here, which is V3. So I expect to see a shift in G3's voltage with the increase in signal. But if that was the case, I would also expect the magic eye to be shifting. So what I need to do is probably look at the grid of T1 and see if there's any voltage swing. Now T1 is the magic eye, which is here, and that's looks like the first pin round. Okay, so it looks like this orange pin here. We can see that the zoom in a bit so you can see. The magic eye is down here. This is the board of the magic eye. This looks like the grid supply for the magic eye. So I think we'll put a scope across it. It's, no, I won't. I'll put a meter because you can see the meter easily. Let's have a look at the voltage on there. We've got a negative voltage, what you expect from an AGC circuit. Let's tune. So that's obviously the AGC circuit. It's going largely negative. Oh, you can't see, can you? Oh, shit. So this should be the grid of the tuning indicator, which also is tied up with the automatic gain control line. So let's have a listen. I've got the volume flat out. Okay, so we've got -1 volt there. It looks to me like the AGC is very slow to respond. Now, clearly working, but it's not convinced that's right. The strange thing is, even though we've got that big shift in voltage, the magic eye doesn't shift. It also looks like there may be the discriminators offline, because if you watch the way I tune it, if I reduce the level further, it's 100 microvolts. You can hardly hear the audio, but it's not distorted. Okay, let's increase 1000 microvolts. It's 1 millivolt now. So that's peak tuning. Just some discriminating there. Oh, the audio's better. There's clearly something wrong with the radio, and I can't work out what it is, to be honest with you. I think it's either I don't think it's an alignment issue. I think it's actually a problem with the AGC. I'm pretty sure of that.